I'm ready.
Welcome to Dove and Dragon Radio. I'm your host, M.L.ruscsak. I'm here with David Poses. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's great to
Now
be
you have this wonderful book out, and it's a true story. It's called The Weight of Air, a story of lies about addiction and the truth about recovery.
here. Yes. It comes out.
So how did you get to writing this book? Because I'm assuming this is your story.
Yeah, this is my story. Writing had always been, I guess I wouldn't call it a passion. It's more of a bodily urge. I basically went from one novel to the next and wrote a bunch of short stories, but I was too afraid of failure to do anything with them. I struggled with drugs and depression for decades and kept it from everyone in my life. And as the opioid crisis, before there was an opioid crisis, but as people started dying and opioid addiction was becoming a national health emergency, I felt like I knew that I wasn't the exception. And I felt like I was just overwhelmed with guilt and shame for deceiving my family. And I believed that my story would be able to help others. So I wrote this book.
Well, that's always a good thing, that we take one of our negatives and turn it into a positive for someone else.
Sure.
I know the opioid problem epidemic is an epidemic. It's globally, it's not always in the forefront of everyone's thoughts, but it's there.
Yes. Yeah.
I've had family members that have struggled with this. So as a person that has seen this, I understand that there's an internal struggle and an external struggle.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know if epidemic is a fair word. Epidemics can be contained, and based on our response, it's really a plague. I mean, we couldn't have possibly planned to be, it's just built for failure, basically.
Well, I know we don't plan for it. I don't think there's actually a cure-all, but because one, you have to have something tailored per person. It's not gonna, a program that works for me, for say, won't necessarily work for you. We have to work with the individual, not with just a overall thing. It doesn't work for everyone.
Yes. Well, yeah, I mean, there's definitely there's no universal profile of addiction. There's no universal warning signs. So there's definitely no universal cure, but there are things, medically assisted treatment, buprenorphine and methadone are proven to dramatically cut the risk of overdose, relapse, and death, while the predominant treatment model, which is faith and abstinence, is actually proven to dramatically increase the risk of relapse, overdose, and death. So really, there's a lot of misinformation out there and things that we just kind of accept that are baked into our collective conscious. And that was, part of the idea of this book, was that I went through, by the time I was 19, before I stopped, before I started keeping secrets, I had been through every conventional form of treatment, from inpatient rehab to medical detox to a halfway house, AA meetings, NA meetings, 12-step, the whole thing. And it just, I couldn't reconcile my experience with that mentality. I mean, the idea that, my addiction is a symptom. Depression was my gateway. Heroin, it killed my emotional pain. It's a painkiller, and that's what it does. So the idea that, we're pushing this, sobriety is the answer. Sobriety cures your physical dependence upon a substance, but not the compulsion to use. And so addiction is compulsive use despite negative consequences. So if you stop doing something, that doesn't make you not want to do it,
Right.
So dealing with everything that led up to the drug use, that's definitely on an individual basis, and it needs to be taken care of. When I was in rehab, they said, and I insisted on these things, they said, no, depression's an excuse, that's addict mentality. addiction is your problem. And I knew that that wasn't true. And I knew that my experience, I was the norm. I mean, I never met a stereotypical junkie. And so the idea of spreading this became really, important to me. And over the years, like 25 years ago, I was, an outlier spewing blasphemy. And over the past couple of years, it's nice that addiction science has been reflecting my, crazy opinions as irrevocable facts. That certainly helps.
Right. Over the last 15 years, we've seen a lot of new studies come out, depending on how addiction works for an individual. We've seen the methadone, we've seen treatment centers, we've seen go here for this treatment, go here for that treatment, more Al-Anon and AA meetings popping up everywhere. But at the same time, I also have, well, you're an addict, so here's your needles. We'll give you, please come to our hospital, we'll give you clean needles. This is a program that's in my city, actually. I've never been an addict, so I don't have that mentality, but at the same time, my family does have addicts. So I see this, and I see them, I see the lies. You can call them out on the lies, and you get more lies.
Well, of course you do. I mean, we're ashamed. We're breaking the law, so of course we're going to lie. I mean, and
Exactly.
extrapolating that to everything else. I mean, look, I'm an honest person. I lied about my drug use because I was ashamed of it. That doesn't mean that I'm lying about everything else. And I think that, holds true. And a lot of the, kind of attitudes about drugs, like, I mean, I said to one of my relatives recently, look, if you heard the way you sound when you talk about drugs, you'd know why I don't want to talk to you about it. But the needle exchange programs and all of that stuff, I mean, clean needles stop the spread of disease and save lives.
Right. I get it.
Yeah, nobody's starting to use drugs because clean needles are available. Otherwise, every doctor in the hospital would be on drugs right now. So, we're moralizing this problem and not looking at it from a health and safety perspective. The fact is, like, my family was not happy. Nobody wanted me to be using drugs or certainly injecting heroin, but I'm quite certain that they're happier that I'm alive now than if I would have died of AIDS because I couldn't get clean needles. So, we're looking at it like, if you fall off your bike and hurt your head, that's a head injury. So we're not going to give you a helmet because that would be crazy. You're engaging in reckless behavior. I mean, with everything else, anything that's dangerous, we find ways to make it safe. With this, we're moralizing it and we're just saying, no, we're not going to do that. And then, AIDS, we have these AIDS outbreaks. We have, the safe consumption sites. Nobody wants them in their town, and that's fine. But the fact is, in the history of safe injection sites all over the world, all of them 100%, since the first one ever opened, everybody that's ever been in one, there's never been an overdose fatality in one of them. They save lives. Nobody wants them. That's fine. They work.
Well, I have no opinion either way. I love my family, but at the same time, I want them here, but I also want them clean. But I can't always get what I want.
Well, I mean, that's exactly the thing. So if you know that, then the question is, do you want to reduce harm or do you want to increase it? And if you want to increase harm, then I mean, I feel bad for you, but I don't imagine that anybody wants to. And it's not the question isn't, of course everybody wants people to stop using drugs, but as you said, if you can't have that, then your other options are death or saving lives.
Right. I mean, we've gone through, like I said, I have family members. I have a sister that's 2 years clean, thankfully, finally. 30 years later, we finally got her clean. And I have a niece that's 2 months clean. So we're dealing with it, but at the same time, they're going through programs and each one is tailored for them, what works for them. Because what works for my sister didn't work for my niece.
Of course. Yep. Yeah.
So I get it. I get the outsider perspective. I hear the insider for my family. And I'm thankful for books like yours because now we can bridge that gap.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's really the idea, is to get it more out in the open. I mean, we as a society, like we make a lot of these assumptions that just simply aren't true. I mean, we understand opioids for physical pain in the sense that your foot gets chopped off, doctor prescribes opioids. Like nobody's going to say that doesn't make sense. Of course it makes sense. Your foot got chopped off.
Yeah.
Right. So opioids regulate physical pain and emotional well-being. So emotional and well-being is pain. They target your opiate receptors. Heroin doesn't know if your foot got chopped off or if you're miserably depressed. And so at the top of this problem is this double standard of, we know that we can't will away physical pain. We think we can will away psychological pain. And until 1914, opioids were the default medication for anxiety, trauma, depression, everything.
Mhm.
Since we
They were
decided,
put in Coca-Cola. They were put in root beer.
cocaine was in Coca-Cola, but yeah.
Mhm.
But so we understand them for physical pain. We don't understand them for emotional pain, but opioids don't care about that. They don't know if you have a prescription. They don't know what kind of pain you're trying to kill. So the idea that somebody's taking them because they're depressed and they don't have any other resources. I mean, I was suicidal. Like my alternative was suicide to heroin. So it's not like, oh, just don't use drugs and you'll be fine. Like there,
Mhm.
we're in the middle of a mental health crisis. I mean, depression rates are skyrocketing. The idea of just say no, if the least likely person to just say no to a painkiller is somebody who's in pain. And everybody does the best they can with the options that they have at the time. I mean, nobody wants to be a junkie,
Mhm.
but we have this this structure set up that just doesn't really understand what's actually going on, and we lump everything together as recreational drugs, and we invalidate the common denominator among all opioid users. I mean, it's pain. Pain is the gateway, and if we're not going to do anything about the pain I mean, we should be hating the reasons that people are using drugs as much as we hate drugs. Like, let's hate depression. Let's go to war with anxiety and trauma. I mean, we judge people for using drugs, but we don't say, well, why are you using drugs? I mean,
Mhm.
and people don't ask that. It's generally, oh my God, they're on drugs. We got to freak out and get them off it. You're killing everybody. You're killing your family. This is terrible. And that's fine. I mean, they're dangerous. I understand that. But, for years after I got sober, I would go around saying, "Oh, heroin is pure evil. It steals your soul," and things like that, because that's what I thought people wanted to hear. But by saying that, I'm invalidating my reasons for using. I mean, I couldn't function without it because I was so terribly depressed and I didn't know what to do about that. And so, nobody ever says, "What are you trying to accomplish with this drug use? Like, what's the problem?" It's just we assume that the drugs are the problem. I mean, if you've ever seen that TV show Hoarders, that
Mhm.
show. Yeah, so like in every episode, I mean, I haven't seen a lot of them, but in every episode of Hoarders, it's always like, here's Joe's house, it's filled with crap, um, you know, and his problem isn't that he can't stop buying things from Walmart. The problem is his wife died 3 years ago and it was tragic and he hasn't dealt with the grief right and blah, blah, blah. So we know that it's a compulsive behavior, which is a mental health disorder.
Mhm.
Addiction is compulsive use despite negative consequences. So by stopping the behavior, by getting Joe to stop buying stuff at Walmart, that doesn't mean he's dealt with his wife's death and he's over the grief or anything like that. It just means he's not buying shit at Walmart anymore. And so
Right.
what we're doing with this is we're pushing this idea that abstinence is the cure, and it's just not. It you and we use it so interchangeably with recovery. Like, you have to unpack the baggage that led to the drug use.
Mhm.
Just not taking drugs, not doing anything, isn't going to make you not want to do it. Whether you're addicted to drugs or sex or gambling or food or running, or it doesn't matter what it is. With running, if I was depressed and running made me feel better, nobody's going to say, "Oh my God, running is causing all of your pain. You got to stop running." You're not going to be,
Yeah. No
depression is
one's going to say it because it's a positive, what we see as a positive.
much healthier, no question. But still, nobody's going to say that. But it is the exact same thing. It's a compulsion for relief. So what are you trying to relieve the pain from? Why don't we deal with that? And we're just not doing that. I mean, we're very judgmental and moral. And I had a very successful career in private equity for 20 years. I'm the breadwinner for my family. I'm married. I'm a father. I certainly didn't want to, go around screaming this in public, but I just felt like, if I'm actively working against the changes that I want to see in the world if I'm silent. Because if I'm denying the existence of my struggle, how can I expect anybody else to talk about it? And I'm coming from a place where, I second guessed everything that I said. I would reread emails after I sent them and think that everybody's, hates me and all of that kind of business. And so it's really, kind of miraculous to be in a place where I really don't care if anybody wants to judge me for it. I know that this is right. I know that everything that I'm saying is not some crazy opinion. It's scientific facts, and this is just how it is. So if somebody wants to say, "Oh my God, that sounds crazy," that's fine. That's their opinion, but that doesn't make it true. And they might not like it, but that's not my problem.
I mean, we have the same judgmental opinion. We go to the show 600-Pound Life on the same network as the Hoarders. We judge people because we see their physical well-being.
Sure.
We don't know what's going on inside their mind. Now the show digs in, okay, we need to deal with the problem. And a lot of times they will bring psychologists, or whatever on the show to deal with the person's inner problem.
Right.
We need to apply that mentality that, hey, this isn't just a physical that we're seeing, but there's something going on in the brain.
Yes.
And in the mind, in the essence of the person, not just a physical response.
Yeah. I mean, depression is a degenerative biological, issue. So the idea that it's just going to go away because you stopped. I mean, if we look at it from the physical side, which again we understand, like the idea that bad people use painkillers instead of people who are in pain use painkillers, like that gets us off on this crazy tangent. But like if your foot gets chopped off and you stop taking painkillers, your pain is going to get worse.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of like, oh no, you're going to feel much better when you stop. So like we're setting up this crazy false hope that we actually know. I mean, we debunk these myths in our everyday life. We know it's not true if your foot got chopped off.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we insist that these things are true on the other side because they're just so baked into our collective consciousness. But again, that doesn't make them true. And we have to. You're exactly right. We have to go after. Every individual has their own issues, and if we're going to dismiss them, then I mean, we really have no right saying that we're treating anything because we're just not.
Right. Sometimes we have to go back to early childhood. Sometimes we have to go back to a more recent, like a death in the family. We have to look at the individual. We need to find the root cause. Once we find the root cause, then we can administer help.
Right. And we know that for everything else. With any other condition, we know you treat the wound so the person can heal. With any other, physical, mental condition, we know that God doesn't cure diseases. And yet we insist that you have to go to an AA meeting if you want to cure addiction and start to pray because that's the only thing that's going to make you well. If you swap addiction with just medical condition in parentheses and you take our predominant approach, it is completely fucking bonkers. And we know that. If anybody said, cancer, I mean, since bubonic plague, we've known that God doesn't cure diseases. And yet we insist this is true. We have these ideas that, the people who don't recover are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves and these things that like, would you say that to somebody with cancer? And even the medication, that I take, buprenorphine or methadone, which, these things are proven to work. And we have this idea that like, oh my God, it's just as bad as heroin. It's an extension of your addiction. They're lying and all like that. Nobody would say that with insulin. I mean, nobody would say, I've been on it for 13 years. Of course, I don't want to be taking something every day. I don't want to be tethered to, I don't even want to take Advil when I have a headache, but I know that it's keeping me alive and it's making me the best person that I can be. So nobody would say to me, oh, you've been on this insulin for 13 years. When are you going to stop taking that life-saving medicine so that your diabetes is clearly in check? Yeah, it is. And this is why it's in check. So for me, like if I'm susceptible to that kind of, shame and stigma, and I'm out in the world screaming about this stuff, I can't imagine what it's like for like, a 20-year-old kid in Kentucky whose parents are being fed this expert, nonsense from, quack medicine is experts without medical credentials, pushing cures that involve magical thinking. And that's exactly what we're doing with these programs.
You just hit on something my dad has said, and he's from Kentucky. God rest his soul. But that's something he would say all the time is quack medicine. We don't know really what is medicine, and it doesn't matter if it's coming from doctor or your neighbor. It's all quack medicine. That's something he said right up until he passed away. But at the same time, we have that mentality. If a doctor is saying it, if our neighbor is saying it, if a seasoned professional is saying it, then it must be true.
Well, I guess what I meant by that was more the idea that, my counselor in rehab didn't graduate from high school, and yet he's an expert. So the Faith and Abstinence program insists that the only way to achieve remission from a complex medical condition is to put your life and will in God's hands and work the steps of this anonymous self-help group. So if an oncologist said that to a cancer patient, that would be insanity. So the idea that like maybe doctors don't know what they're talking about, there are some doctors that don't know what they're talking about, but I'm certain that somebody without medical credentials is even less qualified to talk about it than somebody who's gone to school, for it. So we've got 1.5 million licensed physicians in America right now. It's a pretty big number. If you have the most, obscure disease, there's probably 5 doctors in your town that can treat it. And yet of that 1.5 million, 1,183 are certified in addiction medicine. So if 22 million people are struggling with addiction right now, that's a 1 in 18,775 ratio. It's not enough. I mean, it's just not enough. So we have these AA meetings and these things that pop up all over the place, and even though they're actually proven to kill you, we don't know that because they're more prevalent than these other things. And a lot of these faith and abstinence programs are contributing to the stigma of the medically assisted treatment because they feel anything other than Advil is, you're stoned, you might as well be, whatever. But I mean, we learn in early childhood drug prevention that each type of substance has a different effect on our neural pathways. If you drink, this happens. If you smoke pot, this happens. If you take acid, that happens. And so we know that, nobody can identify anybody that wakes up at 7 o'clock in the morning and starts guzzling vodka and functions all day. I mean, we just know that, right? But there's millions of people all over the world who are prescribed, prescription painkillers all over the world for some kind of physical malady. And we not only know they can function on them, we know they need them specifically to function, right? So we know these things, we know everything affects you differently, and yet we have this idea that like heroin is this crazy ass hardcore drug, but alcohol is totally fine because it's legal. I mean, alcohol can shut down all of your organs. All other drugs combined can't cause that much damage. Alcohol withdrawal can be fatal and has been known to be fatal, in a pretty high percentage of times. No other drug is that addictive. So we accept that alcohol is safe because it's legal, but in fact, alcohol is safer because it's legal. During Prohibition, alcohol fatalities were just as bad as the illegal drug fatalities are now, because if you buy a bottle of you don't know what it is and it turns out to be methanol, you can't prevent overdose. That's exactly what's going on with drugs right now. So the idea that everything is safer when it's legal and regulated, I mean, that's just a fact. But we have this idea that, oh my God, if drugs were legal, more people would die. This is the leading cause of death in America right now. 280 people are dying every day because they don't know what they're taking. That's like if you open a beer, if it's fair to assume that you could drink a beer without dying, right? Like you're not going to overdose on alcohol, but you couldn't drink 12 ounces of methanol without dying. If you don't know what's in that bottle and it's methanol, you're dead. And that's what's going on here. So if you see the bottle and it says this is methanol, you're not going to drink it. And that's why illegal drugs are involved in, are people still going to die if drugs are legal? Of course they are. People are dying from alcohol because it's legal, but it's safer. So the option isn't, we're not deterring the behavior with the laws. The question isn't, do you want people to use drugs or not? The question is, do you want people to die or not?
Right. We see, I forget which country it is, they have marijuana cigarettes. And of all the drugs, it's supposed to be the safest drug. I don't know, but I'm not a professional. But at the same time, they have it in cigarette forms. It's regulated. You can buy it. You have to have an ID like you do regular cigarettes. You get a pack. Everything is regulated. We come to the US, we're starting to see it being legalized in certain states, but yet it's not regulated. So you can still not die from the marijuana, but we don't know what's being put in the marijuana.
Well, right. I mean, nobody's ever died of a pot overdose, so that's not going to kill you, but you're exactly right. That's the problem. And so like with decriminalization, that means you're not going to get arrested for possession possessing the drug. It doesn't mean that you know what's in the drug. So the idea of like, if you look at it in terms of alcohol, if I don't know what I'm buying, but I'm holding a bottle of it, that's not when it's going to kill me. It's the not knowing what I'm buying. And then when I open it and drink it, those are the problems. So not getting arrested for holding it, like, so what? I mean, it's, you shouldn't be arrested, don't get me wrong, but like, that's not the life and death danger there. So the idea that we're going to, decriminalize, I mean, Oregon recently decriminalized, and I think it's an important step, and obviously it's not going to all happen in time, but if you don't know what you're putting in your body, that's the highest risk of death. And you could know. I mean, there's plenty of, every type of substance, the potency of every substance can be measured. We only measure potency of legal substances. Potency is by volume. That's why the pint of grain alcohol is going to kill you and the pint of beer won't. So drugs are exactly the same. I mean, when you see, pills like OxyContin, a 10 milligram OxyContin pill isn't 10, like, the 80 milligrams aren't hamburger
Yeah.
size, so it's just a question of knowing what you're using. And we have to get past this idea that like, this moralizing and the idea that somehow it's not a fair equation. I mean, we have to be safe. An entire generation of kids is growing up now, having lost parents and friends to this. Every overdose fatality is preventable. Accidental overdose is the leading cause of death. Accidental means preventable. It's preventable if you know the potency of the substance. Overdose is literally an overly potent dose. If you don't know what's in your pint glass and it's methanol, you're dead. The way to avoid that is to know that it's methanol in your pint glass. Legalization and regulation means you know what's in the pint glass. Like, that's it. I mean, it's that simple.
It's a warning label. If you have your warning label, basically, you know what's in it, and then you can go from there.
Right. And we have, we have this idea that like legalization is going to lead to widespread use. I mean, I don't, I never like drinking. So, I'm a bad example, but like, I don't buy beer every time I'm at the gas station. If meth was legal, I'm not going to go out and buy meth and start sticking it in my jugular vein. Would you?
No.
Right.
It's just because it's legal doesn't mean I'm going to take it. You can have the people that are still going to take it because now it is legal and they don't have to lie about doing it. Right. But so at the same time, it's now regulated.
Exactly. So I would rather them be safer. And the idea that like more people are going to do this because it's legal. I mean, if you're not buying beer and I'm not buying beer and we're not doing meth and all that kind of business and we don't know anybody who is, then I don't know what makes us think that like the entire rest of the country is going to become a meth addict all of a sudden. It's the same people. So the laws aren't deterring the drug. Laws don't stop people from using the drugs. Laws stop people from living. I mean, that's what it is.
That pretty much is what it is. We've seen this with prohibition. Just because it's illegal doesn't make people stop doing it.
No, it totally doesn't. Right. Exactly. I mean, would more people be interested and curious and try it if it was legal? Sure. But would you rather have more people try it and live or the same number of people using it and dying? I mean, that's the question.
Because now we go into another problem though, with being illegal. You have your dealers that cut in anything within the drug that they're selling.
Right. So, I mean, there's no account. There's no, they're not paying taxes either. And the idea, I mean, look, I think any halfway intelligent drug dealer has to be aware that a dead customer is not good for repeat business. I mean, it's just common sense. But there's no quality assurance label. There's no 1-800 number to call if your heroin has some, bad shit in it.
Yeah.
And that's really the difference. You're not going to buy a beer that turns out to be methanol because Anheuser, you'd own Anheuser-Busch if that happens to you.
Yeah.
So it's really just, we know the right thing to do. If drugs were out of the equation and we said something's really dangerous, if we did this, it would save lives. Nobody would have a problem with it. The minute you stick drugs into it, everybody, oh my God, that's terrible. So like the argument for legalization and regulation is actually the same as the argument against, because the people who think, oh, if you're using drugs, then you deserve to die, so drugs would be safer if they were legal and regulated. That's the argument. That's my argument for it. And the guy who thinks you deserve to die because you're using drugs, that's his argument against. They shouldn't be safer. If you're going to be that stupid, you should die. I mean, and that's really, the idea that like they have some kind of moral high ground for that argument. I mean, you're morally objecting to making drugs safe, and you think drug users should die, and you think that you're the moral high ground? I mean, come on. You can't morally object to reducing harm.
You really can't, but we're almost out of time. So how can our listeners and our viewers find you?
Right. Okay. So I'm davidposes.com is my website. And david.poses at Facebook. We're on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm David the Kick. All of this stuff is on my website. If you just go to my website, it's all there, and you can contact me and stuff.
Thank you so much for being on the show. And for our listeners and our viewers, the links to find David are in the comment section for you to find, because I like making this easy. And this is one of those discussions that need to be said more than once.
I think so, for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being on the show today. And for our readers and our listeners, happy reading.